everyone, and welcome back to the Biblical Fiction Buffs podcast. My name is Jenna Van Mourik, and I'm an author and reader of biblical fiction and ancient historical Christian fiction novels. In today's episode of the podcast, I wanted to talk about a few different authors and what I admire about them. So this is speaking both as a reader and a little bit as a writer, just in terms of, parts of the craft that I really, enjoy reading from these authors and how much I admire the way that they can pull off these very specific things in fiction. If you're looking for recommendations, you might find that a lot of these things are things you enjoy too, so you might try out these authors. This is not a comprehensive list of every biblical fiction author ever, so I don't want anyone to be offended if maybe their favorite was left out or I didn't mention everyone. And it's also, just my opinion and not even all of my opinions, just a few different things, like a bullet pointed kind of list of just a few favorite authors and a few things that I think they do really, really well in their stories. And this is also in no particular order. So with all of that disclaimery stuff and nonsense out of the way, let's get into the episode and the discussion. First up, I wanted to give a shout out to Tessa Afshar and her books, but especially recently The Hidden Prince, which is her most recent release. And it's also one that we've been currently talking through and talking about in the Biblical Fiction Buffs book club / discussion group on Instagram at Biblical Fiction Buffs. And she is just so good at plotting a good story. I always feel like, if you're interested in a Tessa Afshar book, barely read the synopsis and then don't look at any reviews, because her plots are so intricate and they're so full of twists and turns, and especially in The Hidden Prince, major surprises. So it's so hard to find any review or anyone talking about it where something isn't spoiled. And I just think it's so the best experience to go into her books completely blind and without any knowledge of what's going to happen and just dive headfirst into it, because her plots are so exciting and they're so deep. And every time, you guys, I am always continuously surprised at what she does. Like, there's always something that comes out of nowhere that I wasn't expecting, but yet that fits so seamlessly into the plot and into the world and the characters, and it's so good. When you think you understand her characters and the journey that they're going to go on, something big and dramatic happens that changes everything in the best way possible, and it just makes the stories that much better and the lessons so much more impactful and so much more powerful, so much so that they stick with you well after you stop reading. And her books are the kind that you just can't stop thinking about because of, like, what about when that happened and when this happened and then this happened, and they stick with you for a while. They're really memorable and they're just so exciting. And there's something about Tessa. There's something about Tessa Afshar and her plots. So from a writing perspective and a reading perspective, but from a writing perspective, something that I love learning and love analyzing and really digging into when I read a Tessa Afshar book is how she plots things out and how she sets things up and how there's foreshadowing, and it always keeps you on your toes and it keeps you guessing and it keeps you looking for the answers to little mysteries all throughout the story. The next author that I have on my list is Barbara M. Britton, and something that I love about her books is her characters, and they're just so fun. And her books are, I think they're usually a little bit shorter than most biblical fiction books. At least they're smaller, but I think they're usually a little bit shorter. But as soon as I open the first page, I almost always fall in love with the characters, and they're just so immersive, and her writing style really draws you into them and their mindset and their world, and they become so real. Like, I'm the kind of person who I have to stop myself, because there have been, I kid you not, literal times where I have been out shopping and I've thought, oh, I should pick some of this up for this character. And then I have to stop myself and I'm like, Jenna, they're not real. Like, there was a time a couple of years back where I saw something in a store. This was Christmas time. I saw something in a store and it had like a little quote on it, and the quote reminded me of a character and their like journey and their story and their interests, and it was like their favorite color, and it had like something on it that just reminded me of them, like they were nature lovers and it was very nature inspired. And I grabbed this thing that I think was like an inspirational journal or something, and I put it in my cart and I walked around the store with it before I realized, just before before I got to the register. So, no embarrassment there. But then I realized, oh, right, they aren't real. They're only real in my mind. So, especially for Barbara M. Britton's books, I love her characters. I love how they stick with me. Even to this day, like years have passed since I started reading Barbara's books, and I can still recall, like instantly in a snap, in the blink of an eye, I can still recall her characters and their journeys and their love stories and everything they say and their attitudes and their they're just their one-liners and their greatest moments, and they just really stick with me. As a writer, I love to, really read her books and look at how she does that and how she makes these characters that you fall in love with so fast, and then you're not ready to let them go once you're done. The next author that I wanted to talk about and discuss in today's episode is Connie Lynn Cassett, and this one was really hard. Connie Lynn Cassett could fit into so many different categories for me. She is one of the first biblical fiction authors that I ever read. In fact, her book, Counted with the Stars, was the second biblical fiction book that I ever read. Before that, it was Misu Andrews' The Pharaoh's Daughter, and then it was Connie Lynn Cassett Out from Egypt series. There's so many positive things I could say about her and her stories, but I think in particular, I'm going to try and narrow it down to love stories and really transformative journeys. So her books, like Tessa Afshar, often have a lot of twists. They often have a lot of adventure and excitement and adrenaline and stuff that will keep you up till midnight reading. Like, her books are the kind of books that I know do not start reading this before bed, except I don't listen to my own advice and I usually start reading them before bed. Regardless, her characters go on these amazing journeys within themselves. Like, they learn so much about themselves, but then usually there's romance involved. So they're growing not only as an individual character, but also alongside another character. And they're just so sweet and so romantic and so powerful. And like I said, the best way I can describe it is transformative journey. Like, her books, when you read them, you go on a journey with these characters, especially like the Cities of Refuge series. A lot of times in those books, you are literally going on a journey because the characters are like fleeing one place and going to another. Or in the Out from Egypt series, they're, literally trying to get out from Egypt and leaving Egypt and establishing the Promised Land and Israel and all of that. And in her most recent series, which I think was the Covenant House series, the characters also go on quite a few journeys. And I really just don't want to give any spoilers away, but her stories are just transformative, and her love stories, her romances are some of the best in biblical fiction, because even now I can remember these couples and the things that made them sweet and the things that made them work so well together, and how I cried at some of them and how I just ached for them to get together and share their feelings. And they're just, it's some of the best in biblical fiction, specifically for like the transformative journeys. I know I keep saying it, but the transformative journeys these characters go on externally and internally and with other characters. And I think if I could try to learn one thing from any author, it would just be, how does Connie Lynn Cassett do all of that? And not only do all of that so well, but do it every single time. They're so good and I love them, and you should read them all. And if you do get the chance to read them, you should also try to read them in the order of when they were published, because I think up until this point, all of the characters in some way, shape, or form connect with a previous character. They're not like one big long series, but there's just little references, and it's just better when you read them all together, guys. The next biblical fiction author that I admire is, of course, Misu Andrews. And the reason I admire her so much is because of her world building abilities and her ability to really immerse you in the world. So something that I always know when I'm going to open up a Misu Andrews book is that I am going to learn something, whether that's about the Bible or something in history or a custom or a tradition or a thing that happened in history and daily lives of people in different time periods and ancient centuries and civilizations. I know when I open a Misu Andrews book, I am going to learn something, and more than likely I am going to learn a lot. Misu Andrews' books have so much research, and you can really tell that she loves the research process when you read her stories. And the best part about it is that it doesn't bog down the narrative. It doesn't slow it down. It just immerses you even more in the world and what it was really like for people to live back then, and how they did certain things, how they did their makeup, what kinds of clothes they wore, but also like remedies for, sicknesses, and how they treated different illnesses, and just different things, wild things. And they're all throughout Misu Andrews' books. And if I could learn anything from her, it would just be how she does that so seamlessly. And just the knowledge in her brain, like, does that come to you all at once? Do you know what you're going to include, or does it come up, as you are going? Do you research as you go? Do you know it's so amazing and so admirable. And if you love really deep historical fiction that gets you deep into the history side of things, I definitely recommend Misu Andrews. And then the last author that I really quickly wanted to give a shout out to and say something that I admire about them is Lynn Austin, who writes in a variety of different genres, but speaking specifically about her biblical fiction series that I've read, the thing that I love the most about her books is that they are big casts of characters, they are big stories, and they take place over a big chunk of time. So her stories really allow you to settle in and get comfortable and get cozy with like a specific character or a family or a setting, and just really immerse yourself. You're in it for the long haul when you open a Lynn Austin book up. Like, they're big books, but they're so well worth it. You get to spend all this time with the characters, and the thing that I just admire the most is how she weaves it all together. All these characters, all these plots and subplots, all of these, stories and lessons and settings and time spans and years and periods of time, and she weaves them all together to make this one beautiful narrative that is just full of so much power and impact and story. And they're definitely stories that I take great inspiration from, not just as like a writer, but just in my day-to-day life. There's a lot of times where I come up against something, or I'm experiencing a problem or an encounter, and I am drawn back to a plot or a story that Lynn Austin wrote. There's just a lot. They stick with you, and you kind of carry them with you even when you're done. So those are 5 different authors and 5 specific things that I admire about these biblical fiction authors. Do you admire the same things about them, or are there other authors you'd like to mention or shout out? Please let me know. My name is Jenna Van Mourik, and I'm an author and reader of biblical fiction. You can connect with me personally on Instagram at Jenna Van Mourik, or on my website at www.authorjennavanmourik.com. You can also follow along and join the Biblical Fiction Buffs online book club and discussion group by following us on Instagram at Biblical Fiction Buffs as well. Thank you again so much for listening. New episodes of this podcast come out every single week discussing all things bookish and biblical fiction, and I will talk to you guys in the next episode.